Happy Sunday! It's been a few years, but I once got stuck in a dark frame of mind for a very, very long time. And right about this time of year always reminds me of that. Reminds me of living in New York in 2001, which for a moment was a good time. After what happened in 2001 in New York, I spent a decade and a half with a reoccurring thought ghosting through my brain. I'm not worth the life God wasted on me. That thought flitted through my head frequently, daily. It was one of two mantras that kind of traded places in me, the other being fists up, head down. For our next 3 weeks, I'd like to discuss Christian cosmology a little bit, how the Christian universe is organized. This week, we're going to start with hell, the great gaping maw that devours wayward souls into a lake of fire. Pretty metal, right? First, we should talk about the lack of reality of hell. It doesn't exist. And that's not Aaron being kind of, weird fringe guy. That's the actual stance of our faith, or rather the hell that people who are unable to live righteous lives are cast into at judgment. Our faith doesn't teach that, that exists. Now, there is an outer darkness, but that's just for demons and the sons of perdition who've rebelled against God, mostly before the flesh and blood human race was born. So basically, if you're born human, you're not going to that outer darkness. That's the actual stance of the latter-day faith, and I fully embrace that doctrine. My own stance is that. So this hellless cosmology is, to an extent, actually more historically accurate than the modern centuries old, but the modern concept of a lake of fire. The Jewish faith of antiquity had no strong concept of an afterlife, period. There really wasn't even a concept of heaven. They didn't have a good concept of an afterlife. Now, eventually, the Jewish faith added a basic cosmology of an afterlife, and it included only Gehinnom, which Gehinnom is not hell. It's just a spirit prison, almost more like purgatory. And we of the latter-day faith do accept that idea, an idea of a spirit prison, the idea of a liminal space between a bad place and a good one. But we'll get into purgatory next week. This week, we just discuss hell. Ignoring for a moment that I and our restoration faith don't believe in hell, what exactly is hell? You can't not believe in something you have no concept of. I think probably quite a lot of us imagine Dante's Inferno when we picture hell. That's what comes to my mind. Or actually, even more likely is some modernization thereof, like something off an Iron Maiden album cover. I didn't have Iron Maiden on hand. I had Meatloaf easily available, so something like this, though, right? Like concentric circles of torment and fire and brimstone. These torments that are literal bodily tortures, each fitting to the sins of the victim. And like things like if you always served your guest frozen waffles, but they were still kind of icy in the middle, then you spend eternity being toasted on a waffle iron. Or you always were breaking your friends' glasses, and so then you're turned into glass and consistently broken over and over again for all eternity. You never return library books, so you're constantly shoved through a library book drop box. That sort of thing. It makes for fantastic paintings, right? Vast landscapes of unclad or scantily clad people enduring all kinds of witty and fitting tortures with fire and lava boiling up everywhere and Dr. Seuss monstrosities dancing about to frolic in the suffering. Or the more modernized version where black electric guitar wielding Viking men stride confidently against a backdrop of volcanoes and sorrow and conquest. I get the aesthetic appeal. I like Meatloaf album covers. I do. But I can't imagine what the end goal of any of that would be in any version of a reality. Eternity is a long time. What could God or anything possibly gain out of eternal punishments? Wouldn't the demons eventually get bored? Wouldn't the sufferers? It doesn't make sense to me. Not only was this idea not present in early Judaism, it would likely have been pretty foreign to Jesus and early Christians as well. When Jesus refers to Hades, it's actually possible he's speaking about the Greek Hades. He lived in a Hellenized world. He certainly wasn't speaking of hell the way we think of it. And Hades, though now conflagrated with hell, is not a place of eternal torment. Again, it's a liminal space, that spirit prison. From what I could find, the idea of hell as a realm of fire and torment didn't begin to dominate Christian thought until the 5th century. So 500 years after Christ, the idea of the Dante-style hell became the norm. We're called a restoration faith for a reason. It's in our interest to reject the ideas that came that far after Christ, that 500 years after Christ. That's antithetical to the concept of a restoration. It would be wholly rejected. These ideas would be wholly rejected by the original Jesus movement, and we try our best to go with ideas that are original with Jesus. But what did these people in the 5th century see the point of their Metallica hell to be? Well, even they understood it to be a little bit allegorical, is my understanding. And even then, the Roman Catholic Church's definition for hell was common. So the current Roman Catholic Church defines hell as a state of definitive self-exclusion from communion with God and the blessed. The Catholic denomination says that one finds oneself in hell as the result of dying in mortal sin without repenting and accepting God's merciful love, therefore thereby becoming eternally separated from God by one's own free choice. I feel like I stumbled on that a little, so let's repeat that really quickly. Hell is the result of dying in mortal sin without repenting and accepting God's merciful love, thereby becoming eternally separated from God by one's own free choice. The eternal punishment is then the only state one could exist in under that definition. In context, Mephistopheles, the demon who tempts Faust, says of hell in the Christopher Marlowe play, "Within the bowels of these elements, where we are tortured and remain forever, hell hath no limits, nor is circumscribed in one self-place. For where we are is hell, and where hell is must we ever be. And to conclude, when all the world dissolves, and every creature shall be purified, all places shall be hell that are not heaven. I'm not worth the life God wasted on me." Could that be hell? Existing in a state wholly separated from the love of God? Not because God has lost her capacity to love you, but because you have lost your capacity to accept his love for you. Would you not then be constantly visited with torture? Because if God is all things and above all things is love, then to reject its love would be to separate from all things. When I was a kid, I had sensory issues. I still do, I guess, if I'm being honest. Back in the 80s, we didn't really have like lights on movies for neurodivergent kids like we do now. So no one really knew what to do with me at skating parties or big, loud, crowded events where I would kind of freak out. I would have meltdowns. Like that was pretty normal. I mean, this is when I was, fairly young. Probably you don't have those same sensory issues. It's not super common, but I think most people are familiar with the experience of being a little overstimulated, maybe from you have a headache and you're just in a bad mood, and then everything and everyone around you, like anything anyone says is annoying and wrong, and the lights are too bright and the dark is too somber, and the show on TV is boring, and it's also too loud at the same time, and you just want the world to stop. And in that state, you're visited with endless torture without circumference, like Mephistopheles describes. And it's not because you've been cast out, but because you've stopped casting in. You feel out from everything. That sounds like a hell. But those moods usually end, don't they? Eventually that headache passes and you feel better, maybe even venture a little smile. According to restoration cosmology, so this is our own faith's definition, hell is between death and the resurrection. Hell will have an end. So maybe it's wrong to say there is no hell, because we've all been to hell. For me, hell was spending a very long time thinking that my life was a waste of God's resources. Because God put me here for a reason. And rejecting the presence of purpose had me at odds with God. If hell doesn't last, then what's it for? Again, what's the point? Keep asking that. What's the point? Well, hell doesn't have a point then, does it? It's something we each do to ourselves in those moments when we reject the gift of life that God has given us, when we turn our backs on the love and opportunities around us, we fall into hell. I think hell is exactly a pointless place. I can't speak for you or even the scriptures, really. I can only speak for myself here. I do think you can find a way out of hell. Our faith teaches that hell is only a temporary thing. It has an end. It's a liminal space. We can move beyond it. And for me, slowly, gently, trying to accept that maybe God didn't make a mistake. That was a good start. I read the book, The Four Agreements, back when quarantine started. It's an easy 2-hour book. It took me no time at all, one evening. And it's not a magical revelation or anything. I don't even agree with all of it. But I thought the agreements offered a nice little map for getting out of a spirit prison when you find yourself in an analogous situation in life. So the agreements are: be impeccable with your word, meaning you should speak with love and integrity, not only to others, but to yourself as well, in your own self-talk. Don't take anything personally, meaning consider what others are saying, but understand that their worldview isn't centered on you. Don't make assumptions, meaning have the courage to ask questions and consider that you might be wrong. And always do your best. You don't have to do more. Just try not to do less. Basically, the heart of those agreements to me is to act with integrity and don't center yourself as the object of suffering. And you'll find yourself outside hell just by nature, because you'll just be outside of hell. One last bit that helped me when I was finding my way out was religion. I know it's cliched, but we're in church. So I think it's okay for me to say. As I clawed my way out of that type of thinking, and this has been a few years now, I reread the Book of Mormon 3 times from cover to cover. You can see my Book of Mormon. This is my favorite one. It's kind of worn out, plain English. Just that act of reading the Book of Mormon 3 times, just that act alone put me in the mind frame that I am God's. It's hard to think that I'm worthy of that distinction. I feel like a soldier in an army that's fighting for a cause I might not represent well. But I do believe this army is the right one. And that gives me a sense of integrity and worth to be a member of it, to be God's, to be Christian. Because if I belong to God, then I'm with God. And anywhere that's with God is outside of hell. I hope you have a beautiful week. God bless.